Ever since I was younger, I had a fascination with mysteries. The obscure, the unsolved, and the unknowable. From interesting to disturbing, harmless to dangerous. Join me as I uncover rabbit holes and track down information on a plethora of topics you may know little about. This is Atlas Investigates. Hello everyone, I'm Atlas, and this is part 1 of the Chris Chan Iceberg. If you're here, I'm going to assume you know what an iceberg chart is. A bunch of information on a specific topic ranked based on how obscure and or disturbing the facts are. Now, Chris Chan is a person on the internet who many people are familiar with, or have at least heard of. Many have given him the title of the most documented person on the internet because of the sheer amount of facts that are available regarding his exceedingly strange life. There are bound to be a few tidbits of information that slip through the cracks when attempting to document everything. I myself have been watching the Chris Chan documentary by Gino Samuel, a series of videos that chronologically compile all the available information on Chris in order to tell the complete story of his life, or at least as complete as it can be. And even after watching that, there were several pieces of info here on the iceberg that even I didn't know about. The iceberg was created by the user Piccadilly on icebergcharts.com and was posted on the 8th of February 2022. This is part 1 of the iceberg, because it's so long that if I put everything into one video, it would surely be several hours long. So today we're just going to start with the first section. The iceberg is organized chronologically as well as by SAGA. SAGA being a term coined by people who document Chris to describe certain eras of his life where events take place. Without further ado, let's begin. Section 1, The Beginning, 1982 to 2000. As a side note, these first few entries are not connected to any particular saga, according to the iceberg itself. However, these events fall under the early childhood era. Bob and Barb Get Married. While the iceberg states this section covers events from 1982 to 2000, Robert Franklin Chandler Jr. and Barbara Ann Weston actually got married on the 7th of June in the year 1980, 2 years prior to Chris's birth. There's a couple of things to note here that might come up later. Both Bob and Barb were in previous marriages that ended in divorce. Both of them also had children from said marriages, though the only one who appears multiple times during Chris's life in interesting ways is Cole Smithy, who is Barb's son. In addition, Bob and Barb met at a bar called Mattie's Pub, though its actual name is probably Matt's British Pub. The birth of Chris. Christopher Weston Chandler was born on February 24th, 1982. That's it. It should be noted that he was born with autism, a neurological disorder that causes people to have difficulties with communication and in understanding social interactions, among other things. Though this term isn't used much anymore due to the adoption of the autism spectrum classification that is popular nowadays, Chris was given the designation of being a high-functioning autistic. This means that he supposedly had a better chance of having a semi-normal, unassisted life and learning to integrate with societal norms given the proper guidance and training. 14 Branchland Court. This is the address of the house where Chris grew up and lived for most of his life. The fact that we even have easy access to Chris's home address is a testament to the gross level of detail regarding his life that there is on the internet. Abusive Babysitter. Now, this is where things get interesting. As previously mentioned, Bob and Barb met at a bar. They were likely alcoholics and continued to go out drinking even after Chris's birth. When they left, Chris was in the care of a female babysitter who had the last name Roach, like the insect, or Roach, like the dude from The Witcher 3. Allegedly, she once locked Chris in a dark room full of nothing but toys because he interrupted her phone call, leaving him alone for an extended period of time. I say allegedly because Chris was 18 months old at the time, and it's extremely unlikely he would be able to remember this happening. It was likely told to him by someone else. According to Chris at one point, this incident is what caused him to become autistic. But that's obviously not possible, since autism is something people are born with. In addition, this event traumatized him so greatly that he was supposedly unable to speak until the age of 6 or 7. Though while he didn't speak, he still was apparently a vocal child, screaming frequently and causing a lot of trouble for his parents. His lack of speech resolved itself one day in 1989 when he picked up a GoBot toy off the shelf and started reading off the back of the package. Sarah Hammer, Chris's first friend. She was the daughter of the Chandler's neighbors, who moved into their neighborhood in 1985. Chris was still mute at this time, but somehow managed to strike up a friendship with Sarah. Even then, while they might have been friendly, Sarah can also be seen as Chris's first bully. She once locked him in the crawl space underneath her house after telling him that Casper the Friendly Ghost was under there. And she also tried to convince him to eat the berries of a honeysuckle flower, which can be harmful if enough are ingested. Despite this, they remained friends until their early 20s, when Sarah got married and moved away. Bob's letter to Chris. As the name suggests, this is a letter that Bob wrote to Chris in 1987. The reason for this letter was a health scare that caused the then 60-year-old Bob to believe that he might not be alive to see Chris grow into adulthood. This was technically true, as even after Chris legally became an adult, he was still mentally a child. Regardless, here is the letter in full. To Christopher Weston Chandler, from your daddy. Started December 26, 1987. The reason for this open letter to you, which will grow as time goes on, is that I know now that I, at best, haven't much time left to share myself with you, particularly to share my things, my dreams, and my thoughts with you at a time in the future when you will be able to understand. Remember to use my things and carry on my dreams if you want to. Hopefully you will grow much older together. I will probably be rambling until I drive you to distraction, but just bear with me, because I will get to the point sooner or later. I hope I have been able to provide for you and your mother until you at least get to college, and for your mother till she joins me at the great sing-along in the sky, or wherever. Anyway, I expect you to take care of her, love her, and never disappoint her for as long as she lives. I also expect you to never disappoint me, because I will always be with you to help you when the going gets tough and you need me. Since everything always seems to happen for the best for me, and when I needed it, I have always felt like my mother was my guardian angel. You look exactly like my mother and I didn't plan my life. I just took it as it came along. I seem to have had no control over it. It always came along with what was right for me. Look at me 8 years ago in 1979, when I was really down and out, no friendship from Alan and Carol, and ready to cash in my chips with heart problems that I didn't even know about. Your mother, Barbara Ann, helped me through the rough spots, and together we had you. Now I really had something to live for. No better things or events could have happened to me. We have come a long way in the last 8 years. Together we have built a whole new life with an exciting set of dreams. I also expect you to never disappoint yourself. If you think you are at a dead end at something you are trying to do, just stand back, and if it is meant to be, an answer or break will appear. Just remember there are many sides to a mountain, and many ways to climb it. If you get stopped, back off, regroup, and try another way. If you are still not successful, maybe it is not meant to be. Accept is as experience and go after something else for a while. If it is meant to be, having it on the back burner simmering for a while is not bad. It will pop up again, and the way to attain it will be there. Everything in its time. Your mother and I have done our best for you. In return, we expect at least that from you, for yourself and your children. I will be talking about a lot of things in no particular order. I won't always spell words right or have the best sentence structure, but then, I am an electrical engineer, not an English major. As a matter of fact, English was my worst subject. I'm going to try to write this just as if I'm talking to you face to face anytime you care to read this. All of the physical objects and things I have we'll talk about. Your mother, Barbara, or your Aunt Harriet will keep for you until you are ready for them. If you don't think you will ever need some of them, or don't want some of them, don't waste them. Try to do something with them that you think your mother and I would do. Recycle them back into the world for the world to use. After all, remember we are only the custodians for a while, and what is one man's junk is another man's treasure. Okay, so here I go. Enough of the preamble. If you're still with me, turn the page. Well, Christopher, one of my actions that I regret most when I was a young man, sometimes in the late 1940s, I think, I was entrusted with my grandfather's straight razor by means of his last will and testament, and I carelessly misused it and broke it by trying to use it as a screwdriver. I found out later that my grandfather Holloman had specifically wanted me to have it because it had been very personal to him, and he wanted me to have something of his that had been very personal to him, something that he had used every day. Well, I still have that broken razor of his, and I still carry the burden of carelessly, with no concern, breaking it. I knew that I would never use it to shave with, but it was my one personal bond with him, and I still feel like I betrayed his trust by carelessly and thoughtlessly misusing it and breaking it. Maybe that razor did have a purpose greater than anything my grandfather and I ever dreamed of, for it is because of my carelessness, unknown words, my grandfather's razor that I am writing this open letter to you. I hope that you will not carelessly misuse, waste, or destroy the value of the many things I have collected for you. Do not be in such a hurry to use, play, or work with these things. First, learn all about them, how to use them and enjoy them, their value, and how you can thoughtlessly waste their value and enjoy them as I have. For example, my very good stamp collection, or all the recorded popular music on cassette tape, VCR tapes and records, the oil paintings, United Nations art graphics, first of the issue covers, first life covers, the complete set of the very valuable wrong first day issues of the United Nations covers, the musical movies I have collected for you on VCR tapes, my books on popular music, movies, entertainers, musical theater, ship models, my daylilies, gazebo, and dreams. As a boy, my greatest dream was to have inherited things from my mother, father, grandparents, etc., but alas, they were poor, and we were poor, and the things we and they had didn't stay around long. I am a collector of things, even more than your mother, and as a boy, I always wished I had a stamp collection, or coin collection, or book collection, in a large old house for my grandparents. Well, I did end up with a few things, which you will get from me. I have the Chandler family Bible from grandfather and grandmother Chandler. The graveyard plots from my grandfather Chandler and mother are buried in Silicuga, Alabama. A few books from my step-grandmother, Holloman, and a few of my mother's sister's books. My father's picture album as a boy, my mother's picture album as a girl, my picture album as a boy, a box of assorted pictures, a box of my mother's things when she was a young girl, including a teddy bear she cut the hair off, thinking it would grow back, my baby clothes, all of my books, stamp collection, records, tapes, paintings, scout badges, trumpet, grandfather clock, my dreams for you, your mother, and other personal things, the things that are left from my parents' lives together and apart, except for the memories which I will try to write down in a separate document called My Memoirs. My father had a second married life, much as I did, And just as you have half-brothers and half-sisters, I have a large number of half-brothers and sisters in Salem, North Carolina, where my father is buried. I have another notebook full called This Is My Working Life, which you might find interesting as to how I spent the 42 years of the working part of my life from high school graduation to 1945 to my retirement in 1987. I have the first and only Scout handbook that belonged to my mother's half-brother, Dr. John James Holloman, Jr. This book started me on the road to becoming an Eagle Scout and a Scoutmaster. More about this in my memoirs. You will get this book as well as all my Scout books, Scout badges, and my dreams for you as a Boy Scout. We can see that Bob placed a lot of importance on his collections, a trait that he certainly passed on to his son. Though, as we'll see later, Chris's obsession with objects only extended to his things, not the things his father collected. The Dreaming Studio. This is a shed in the back of the Chandler's home that Bob converted into a workshop. He put up a plaque that read, Dreaming Studio of Mr. C and Little C, where dreams do come true, 1989. He seemed to want to, at some point, work on things in there with Chris and to build things together. However, Chris can't seem to remember ever making anything with him in there, and the space was later used as storage due to Barb's hoarding habits. This is actually pretty sad. Patti the Dog. Patti was a Beagle Spitz mix dog that the Chandlers got from Chris's Aunt Karina in 1989. Chris was shown to be very fond of the dog, and supposedly was the one most responsible for taking care of her. Out of everyone in his life, he showed the most affection toward her, even ahead of other human beings. It seems that she was always kept outside in the backyard in a doghouse, possibly because of how cluttered the main house was. Nathanael Greene abuse. Chris started going to Nathanael Greene Elementary School starting in the 4th grade. While there, he was supposedly abused by several members of the school's staff. According to him, he was pinned down by several teachers, the guidance counselor, and the school principal. While they held him down, they recorded his screams and cries. He also later accused the principal of being gay and attempting to molest him, but this can't be proven. This incident caused his parents to come into conflict with the school and for Chris to be removed from it. It is important to note that this isn't necessarily the exact events that occurred, and there are several missing pieces of information, and neither Chris nor his parents are reliable sources. Homeschooling. After being taken out of Nathanael Greene Elementary School, Chris was homeschooled for his 5th grade year. After this, he and Bob would move so that Chris could attend the Chesterfield County school system, while Barb and Patti stayed in Ruckersville. He would go on to attend Providence Middle School and later Manchester High School. A fun fact, when you type in Ruckersville, Virginia into Google, the main picture that comes up in the search engine is a selfie that Chris took in front of the Ruckersville sign. Legal name change. During a shopping trip with his father in 1992, Chris saw a musical show by the Leonard Bernstein Symphony Orchestra, a group of animatronic bear characters that perform music at malls in Virginia during the Christmas season. On that...
See it.
During a shopping trip with his father in 1982, Chris saw a musical show by the Leonard Bernstein Symphony Orchestra, a group of animatronic bear characters that perform music at malls in Virginia during the Christmas season. On that day, there were very few people watching the show, and Chris got special attention because of this. When the person operating the Leonard Bernstein character asked for Chris's name, he misheard him and referred to him as Christian instead of Christopher. For whatever reason, Chris fixated on this and insisted he be called Christian from then on out, even going so far as for the family to legally rename him. The information on this event comes from Chris's own recollections, as well as an article posted in the Richmond Times-Dispatch in December of 1993 called "It Took a Talking Bear to Give the Name a Young Boy Loves," where the author of the piece talks with Bob about that day and gets his perspective on the event. Watch and Win Sweepstakes. This was a contest that Chris won in 1993 at the age of 12 that is actually called the Sonic the Hedgehog Watch and Win Sweepstakes. This was a contest that involved watching episodes of the animated Sonic the Hedgehog show that was airing at the time, listening to what Sonic said at the end of each episode, and writing it down on a piece of paper before mailing it in. Chris was one of 2 winners and was granted a $1,000 shopping spree at a store called KB Toys. A local news station covered this event and interviewed Chris himself, which makes this the first of several televised appearances made by him.
Finally tonight, Sonic the Hedgehog is running wildly in the Chandler household this weekend. 12-year-old Christian Chandler of Charlottesville was the winner in a video game shopping spree. Christian is one of only about 100 winners nationally to receive $1,000 worth of SAGA games and equipment. For his parents, it's just another example of how well he's doing. Christian is a high-functioning autistic child. This past fall, on his own initiative, he entered a contest based on a favorite cartoon character.
What I had to do was exactly watch Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon, and I'd listen to what Sonic says at the end of it and write it down for a whole week, and then I had to mail it in, and it has to be drawn out of a hat, and I just won.
And Christian's father says it only takes a few hours for him to master an electronic game and then move on to another. I can't master any of them. That's it for now, and it's just...
The High School Saga. Gal Pals. This is the term, or quickism, meaning an odd phrase that Christian uses or makes up, that Chris uses to refer to female friends of his that are not his girlfriend. Chris has had very few male friends over the course of his lifetime because he thinks of them all as Neanderthal-like violent jerks that get all the women who he believes should be rightfully his. Therefore, he seeks out friendships with women almost exclusively. In high school, he had a specific group of girls that he hung around, though he almost undoubtedly thought of them as being closer than they actually were. It's likely that these girls were either friendly with him out of pity or because they had some sort of agreement with Bob and or the principal to be friendly with Chris. Song of Christian. This is a poem that Chris wrote at the age of 16 for a class in high school and filmed himself reciting. In typical Chris fashion, he forgot to use proper lighting, so the whole thing is fairly difficult to view unless you crank the brightness. The Song of Christian title is taken from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself poem. During the recording, he acts as if he's on some sort of radio show and explains his reasoning behind each of the poem's lines. This later devolves into him talking about Sonic the Hedgehog characters, including Bionic the Hedgehog, his first original Sonic-based creation, and complaining about getting a failing grade in an English class assignment. Here's the poem in full, as read by Christian himself.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Christian Chandler Show. I am your host, Christian Chandler. Now, tonight we are going to talk about poetry and the behind the scenes of the lines, which got me inspired. And I'm going to express my feelings a little bit, so please don't laugh. I'll feel embarrassed. Okay. Anyway, my poem is entitled "The Song of Christian." And I just did it last night on May 14th, 1998. Anyway, I'm going to do my poem now, so here goes. I hear America singing as I sing of myself, and you experience as I experience. The problems of yourself are my problems. The youth of the young singing cries of happiness. The children's song is song of laughter. At age 6 weeks, I sang this song of laughter. Then at 1.5 years of age, the Lord clicked the mute button on me. Those are my parents' songs. They pulled me through the talk again at age 7. I now, 16 years old, and a good talkative tune, hope to achieve new goals and Mario Raceway records and to finish my homemade Nintendo Power magazine. the magazine songs, the Ballad of Sonic the Hedgehog on Game Boy, the rudeness of the teenager song, the despicable mention of rude words, and drugs. I'm not afraid to speak, despise the hazardous flukes in America's song. My song that I sing, although I talk well, my peer relationship is low and my loneliness is off the scale. Anyway, that's my poem.
CWCville. This is when the first evidence emerges of Chris creating a town known as CWCville, though here it's referred to as Quickville with an I. He took pictures using his Game Boy's camera and featured a series of Lego cars racing around the streets of a Lego city, which he calls CWCville. Later, he will start drawing this city and use it as the primary setting for his Sonichu comics. Quick's Pokesite. This was a website that Chris created sometime in 1999. Due to its limited functionality, Chris's gal pal Miranda helped him create Quick's Pokesite 2. He would use this website to post news regarding the Pokemon franchise, as well as personal information about himself. He seemed to want people to interact with the site, as he had sections for a guest book and a user-submitted art, but these sections remained mostly vacant. It's possible, given the extensive amount of personal info on the site, that Chris was attempting to use it in order to make friends and/or have people think he was cool for having his own website. This, of course, didn't pan out. The Game Place. It was during this time that Chris first started going to the Game Place, a local game and hobby store that sold video games, toys, and similar merchandise, as well as hosting events such as the Pokemon League and Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments. He showed up there practically every week, and it was likely the most social interaction he got outside of school. Manchester High leaks. After a house fire in the Chandler home, which we'll get to later, it seems that several of Chris's old high school folders full of assignments, projects, and documents were retrieved. By this I mean that trolls literally sifted through the Chandler's garbage after the fire and discovered them. The leaks were uploaded to the Quickie forums in 2014 by SkyRaider91 and show that teachers seemed to give Chris high grades despite him very obviously having poor writing skills, leaving sections of assignments blank, writing some parts of assignments meant to be in English in Spanish instead, and just generally getting answers wrong. Why he received good grades despite this is up for debate, though it could be out of pity or a fear of being labeled as discriminatory, which is something that the Chandlers were already on the lookout for and have a history of seeing even when it doesn't exist. How the Pokemon Came into Our Pokeballs. This is a short story Chris wrote in his senior year of high school for a class. As usual, he can't think of anything that isn't related to cartoons or video games, so he makes it about Pokemon. He was apparently tasked with writing a myth of some kind, so he chose to write a creation myth for Pokemon. Here is a dramatic reading of the story, so you can judge its quality for yourself. Some people say that the Pokemon came from the sky in a giant rock known as the Moonstone. Others say they originated from the depths of nature's elements, but they are all not true. This is the true story. A long, long time ago in the heavens above, there were such powerful gods as Zeus, Maheo, and many more. But it all started with a rookie god known as Mewtwo. He had the power to help provide for the animals, plants, minerals, and to keep track of the 7 natural powers of the universe: fire, grass, lightning, water, fighting, psychic, and the power of the colorless star. Mewtwo made sure that the animals and plants were fed from nature's good foods. He made sure that nature's minerals, such as rocks, dirt from the ground, and the mucky messes were used for their purpose. One day, Mewtwo said to himself, "There must be a way to allow the animals, small and big, to do these tough chores, so that I may be able to be a little clean." Then, he thought, Why not give some of the natural powers to a new type of creature? So he went down to Earth with the power to absorb the natural powers of the Earth and share it. So he stood in the middle of the Pacific, surrounded by islands of 7 and water. He decided to start with making a powerful animal to assist him in his great task. Then he found a weird creature on an island. It was mostly white, blue eyes, short arms, big feet, and a long tail with a pink psi tip. Mewtwo has never seen such an animal, so he absorbed the power of psychic from the stars, gave the creature a gentle rub on its back, and picked it up. And Mewtwo said to the creature, "You rare creature, you have received the supernatural power of the psychics from the stars above us, but you would need a name for you will be my assistant to make a new type of elemental creatures. I shall call you Mew." And the Mew jumped for joy, then set him down with some wise words. "Mew," Mewtwo said, "I want you to pick some animals that are here now, and share with them the psychic power, for I would not be able to, because I may only share each elemental power only one time for one creature or more. I trust that you can share this power while I handle the other 6 elemental powers." Then he set the Mew down on its island and it went on its way. Mewtwo decided to start with the power of grass, so he rubbed the grass of another island's ground, and he waved his hand over the trees. A Triceratops began to lose its horns, and it turned into a creature called Bulbasaur. A caterpillar lost its fuzz, it grew a little bigger, it turned green, and it got the name of Caterpie. Another caterpillar's fur only shortened, it grew a small horn, it grew a little, like the Caterpie did. It turned orange, and it became a Weedle. A rattlesnake turned purple, and grew a single yellow stripe. It became an Ekans. A rat grew small horns, turned blue, and became a Nidoran, female. And another rat grew bigger horns, turned pink, and became a Nidoran, male. A bat's legs turned to 2 tails as thin as a blade of grass. Its ears grew bigger, and it became a Zubat. A tiny bush sprouted out of the ground, grew eyes, and became an Oddish. A fuzzy bush grew 2 teeth like a vampire. It became a Venonat. A bell-shaped palm shrunk. It became a Bellsprout. A mud puddle grew into a Grimer. 6 eggs bounced and said, "Execute." A puff of smoke became solid and mentioned coughing. A bunch of vines gathered around another Oddish. It was Tangelia. A dragonfly grew and said, "Scyther." The rocks got a body of armor and said, "Pincer." Then Mewtwo dipped his hand into the fiery volcano of another island, pulled it out, and waved his hand over the volcano. Many animals were below. A baby Tyrannosaurus got fire on its tail and yelled, "Charmander." A fox's tail split into 6. Maybe it's now a Vulpix. A dog turned orange and growled, "Growlf." A pony got burned and neighed. A chunk of ash was revived and turned into a Magmar. And a big bird flew out of the volcano. It was a Moltres. Mewtwo then dipped his hand in the ocean's waters and gave another wave over another island, with a big lake in the middle. A baby turtle and a squirrel on an island joined together to make a Squirtle. A fat duck turned yellow with a headache. It became a Psyduck. A tadpole got bigger with a swirl on its belly. A Poliwag came to be. A jellyfish's arms shrunk into 2. It was then a Tentacool. A Slowpoke was formed when a baby hippopotamus grew a tail. A seal turned white and grew a horn on its head. It was a Seal. A shell opened up and stuck out a tongue. Hello, Shelder. A Crabby came when a crab got crowned. A seahorse started to spit oil. A fish grew a horn on its head, and a starfish grew a jewel. Here were a Horsey, a Goldeen, and a Staryu. A crown from a treasure grew onto a hard-shell fish. Here was a Magikarp. A rare Loch Ness monster grew a spiked shell on its back. It became a Lapras. A fossil was revived. It was an Omanite. Out of an Arctic iceberg, an Arcticuno broke out. Meanwhile, Mew shared its psychic power with a Psyduck and a Slowpoke. When Mew shared it with a rat, it fell asleep and grew into an Abra. When Mew came across the body of a dead lizard, it summoned its spirit and shared some ghastly secrets with it. Later, Mew met an anteater. Mew put it to sleep, and the anteater became a Drowsy. Mew found 2 monkeys with an evolution. One turned into a Mr. Mime, and the other became a Jinx. Later in the night, Mew gave birth, and the baby Mew looked different. The new Mew gave its mother a psychic attack and thrown it up a tree. Suddenly, the new Mew grew to the size of that of a man with many years. It was a Mewtwo. Meanwhile, Mewtwo found a barren island with sand and rocks. He punched it, and out of the ground came the fighting and ground-type creatures. Sandshrew, Diglett, Mankey, Machop, Geodude, Onix, Cubone, Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, Rhyhorn, and a Kabuto. Then Mewtwo summoned a thunderstorm, and lightning struck another island. The lightning hit a little mouse, and the mouse grew into a Pikachu. Metallic minerals rose out of the ground of a small area of the island, and it formed to make a Magnemite. A coconut was struck with a piece of the metallic material carrying some of the electric powder. The coconut turned metallic. It became a Voltorb. A wild cat was struck, and it became an Electabuzz. And out of the thunderous clouds came a Zapdos. And finally, Mewtwo planted a transparent star in the middle of the other island, and from the star came the colorless creatures: Pidgey, Rattata, Spearow, Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Meowth, Farfetch'd, Doduo, Lickitung, Chansey, Tauros, Eevee, Porygon, and Dratini. Before Mewtwo bid farewell, he waved his hand over all 7 islands, and most of the creatures evolved into more powerful creatures. And then he shouted out, "May these creatures be helpful to the earth, and may they use their abilities wisely." Then he said with a tear of joy, "Farewell, Pokemon." And Mewtwo flew back into the heavens. The end. Wall of Originals. This is a wall in Chris's room that he used to showcase all the Pokemon cards he had customized to use characters of his own creation. The art is all done in his usual poor style, and each card has a variety of effects, some of which can be considered stupidly overpowered and would never make sense in an actual game. A few standout cards include Sonichu and other related characters, a female Pikachu named Chikachu, an autistic plant Pokemon creatively named Plotistic, and several cards that feature Chris himself in various roles with differing powers. Hotel Ricky Ricardo. This is an assignment Chris did for his Spanish class during his senior year of high school. In it, he describes a hypothetical hotel that he would run. He provides a phone number, address, room numbers, and prices, as well as a basic description of the building, the layout of the rooms, and activities that the guests and employees would be able to do. Predictably, this includes characters from Sonic the Hedgehog, as well as his parents, and a few of his gal pals from school. One thing that stands out about the fragmented segments he lists is a sentence about Chris's mom yelling at his dad when they get angry at each other. Christian's favorite hits. For a graphic design class, Chris was asked to create a cover for an album in March of 2000. This includes the front cover, a track list, and an inlay. Because he was not allowed to use copyrighted characters in the assignment, Chris racked his brains and eventually came up with the character Sonichu in order to avoid copyright violation. As a combination of the characters Sonic and Pikachu, he believed this to be an entirely new character and thus free from restriction. While this is technically somewhat true, connecting two licensed characters into a new one still does not escape copyright laws. The teacher, for whatever reason, allowed Chris to use Sonichu in the album art, along with other character combinations that mostly had to do with Pokemon. The tracklist featured songs off Sonic games, Pokemon games, Mario games, and some jazz music. He later made a Volume 2 to this album in July of 2000 with similar art and tracks. Sonichu. This was already mentioned in the Christian's favorite hits point. Sonichu is an amalgamation of the characters Sonic and Pikachu that Chris made in order to get around a copyright restriction on a school assignment. If you've never heard of Chris before, or if you've barely heard of him, you likely still know of Sonichu given its infamy as a prime example of bad Sonic the Hedgehog OCs, or original characters. Dime a dozen fan creations that are often used as self-inserts into the Sonic franchise. Over the years, Chris has created much lore for Sonichu, convoluted and nonsensical as it might be, and he has even come to believe that this creation truly exists in a parallel universe that will one day merge with our own. But that's a story for later. A Week with Christian Chandler. Another school project. This time it's a written report accompanied by several pictures that document what a week is like in his daily life. This was created when Chris was 18 during his senior year. The report is mostly written in the third person in the style of the script for a documentary and reveals several bits of information about Chris's high school life. Chris admits to falling asleep in class, showcases the fact that his house was already cluttered with junk even in his early years, and documents the production of the cover of Christian's favorite hits. In addition, he mentions himself being in coping class, which is likely some sort of behavioral adjustment class, and the fact that he rides the bus with other children who have mental disabilities, though he considers himself to be better than these kids, who he refers to as slow in the minds. Senior prom. Chris didn't go to his senior year prom with a girl from his class because no one in their right mind would accept a date with him. However, in what amounts to the ultimate case of Chekhov's gun, he would take his mother Barbara as his date. It's also said that his gal pal Tiffany shared a dance with him, though whether this was out of pity or compassion, it's hard to say. The graduation incident. During graduation, Chris threw a temper tantrum because the only award he received was a star pin. He was angry that he didn't get anything for his artistic talents, or the fact that he excelled in math. He felt he should have been given something extra special for graduating simply because he managed to do it while being autistic. Because he was so angry, he refused to make eye contact with anyone on stage while receiving his diploma, slapped away the hand of the presenter when offered a handshake, and then ran off so he could hide and cry. And that does it for part 1 of the Chronological Chris Chan Iceberg. If you pulled up the original image of the iceberg in order to follow along, I'm sure you'll see that I actually added several points of interest myself. This is because I found the original to be a bit lacking in the first tier, and I'll actually be doing the same thing for the following tier. My main sources of information here were the Quickie and Gino Samuel's documentary, both of which you can find links to in the description if you want to do some of your own research on Chris. That said, I'll be working on part 2 of this series as soon as I can, in which we'll be going over Chris's early adult life and his time in college. If you want to know when that comes out, feel free to subscribe to the channel. As always, comment if you have something to say, and like the video if you liked it. I hope to see you back here soon. Bye for now.